In the last few years, we've been seeing a huge surge of survivor-like games which started with Vampire Survivors 2 years ago. Since then, we've seen games like Holocure, Halls of Torment and Soulstone Survivors, and a myriad of other titles, both good and bad. If you're unfamiliar with the genre, these games can be described as roguelike bullet hells, which pit the player up against progressively growing hordes of enemies. While these games do have an element of real-time action, their primary focus lies in testing your strategic skills and knowledge of character builds to successfully become more and more powerful. Another recent addition to this genre is Death Must Die, which entered early access on November 14th, 2023, courtesy of its developers Realm Archive. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be taking a closer look at Death Must Die. We'll review all the content the game has to offer up to this point in its early access state, and we'll ask ourselves the burning question, is it any good? So let's start with the basics. Each time you begin a run, you'll start off as a lowly level 1, and enemies will spawn until you either win or you get your head split open by a skeleton. This wave-based system is nothing new and is very similar to the majority of other survivor-like games. This style of gameplay enables the player to plan and prepare for upcoming fights. At certain times during your run, you'll find yourself toe-to-toe with some specific enemies. For example, at the 4-minute mark, you'll get boxed in and rushed by a horde of little green slimes, and then at 7 minutes, you'll encounter your very first boss, the left and right hands of Dracula. The rest of his limbs don't join the party until later on. In its current state, the game offers one map to play with, and this map ends when you hit the 20-minute mark. And this might seem like a massive lack of content, but as it stands, the game offers around 10 hours of content to unlock everything, and about 15 to 20 hours if you want to fully beat the game. The heart of Death Must Die revolves around replaying the level to get stronger and stronger recursively. The overall look and feel of the game is wonderful, and I can't fault it at all. The graphics boast a wonderful 16-bit style, and I say 16-bit here because the last time I said 8-bit, someone got really offended in the comments. Technically, I'm playing on a 1440p monitor, so can we all just agree that this is a 1000-bit game? Take that, Atari. The soundtrack is great too. It's relatively limited, but it's very catchy and oozes everything you'd expect from a survivor-like. It's not as catchy as Holocure, but it is great in its own right and I enjoyed listening to it. During each run, you'll need to collect green experience orbs dropped by enemies, which enable you to level up. Every time you lose a run, you'll reset back down to level 1, so this progression isn't permanent. Once you've collected enough XP to level up, you'll be faced with a choice of 3 skills, offered by a specific god. These merciless cosmic vending machines are tied to specific types of gameplay, and are mostly random at the start, but as you begin to pick from these choices, you'll begin to see more and more skill offerings from the gods you originally chose, allowing you to synergize and specialize your build more easily as you level up. It's often wise to try and build towards a specific character archetype. For example, selecting choices offered by Mort, the god of death, will focus more on curse damage, while Summer, the god of fire, will allow you to specialize in turning your enemies into crispy bacon. In total, there's currently 8 gods, which provide specific skills and bonuses to the way you play the game, ranging from Lagon, the god of lightning, Winter, the god of cold, and Time, the god of, well, time. I don't know if that name is genius or laziness, but who am I to question divine nomenclature? It's also worth mentioning shrines as well. Not the kinds of shrines where you pray to the RNG gods, but in-game ones which hand out goodies. Every now and then while exploring the map, you'll encounter a random point of interest. Sometimes you'll snag a temporary buff which lasts for a few seconds, providing a boost to speed or damage, but other times you'll hit the jackpot with a permanent buff which lasts until the run ends. So oftentimes I find it beneficial to keep moving around the map and be constantly looking for these buffs, which is an interesting strategy, but it also might bring some issues with slower characters in the future. I hope the developers can take note of this and make sure that it's balanced for characters that are less likely to move around the map as much. After stumbling through your first few runs, you'll start to meet each of the different gods, and each one has their own unique, fully voiced dialogue and lore which I thought was really cool. Early on you'll meet Crom, the god of battle, who basically just wants to rip people's arms off for fun.
Hero, I task you with defeating death. For this, I reward you with my powers. Now obey.
And later you'll meet Lady Justice, who tells us very frequently about how much she hates Crom.
I see you are bearing the blessings of Crom. Know this, hero. Destruction is a double-edged sword.
The way these character interactions are handled is really well done, and provides a good amount of lore and depth to the gameplay by having each god reveal their inner thoughts and feelings as you progress. So while you're busy battling skeletons and zombies, you'll be treated to a nice soap opera of random gods slinging insults at each other, and this was pretty interesting to see. I think my favourite god was Morai, the trio of fate who quibble and quarrel with each other each time you see them. They remind me of that scissors scene from Hercules.
NANI?
The main issue I had with these interactions was the lack of quality in some of the voice acting. Don't get me wrong, the majority of this voice acting was really well done, but in some cases there were some less than stellar voice lines, which put a dampener on what was otherwise a really good and immersive way to integrate lore and thematic design into the level up system. And with that aside, the level up system works similar to other survivor-like games. Each time you level up, you'll encounter a random god who offers you a choice of 3 skills, weighted towards choices that you've picked in the past. This allows you to slowly refine your build based on the random choices you start your run with, and these choices offer a good amount of synergy to one another. Each skill gets its own level from 1 to 5, and a rarity ranging from novice to master, and eventually legend. Both its level and rank change how powerful that particular skill is, by changing its stats. For example, the Trail of Fire skill causes your dash ability to leave a path of fire behind you, and leveling the skill up increases its duration, its damage, and its range. In the game's current state, the rarity system doesn't really offer that much of a difference when compared to level, but both of them are required to make a skill as strong as it can be. After putting a few hours into the game and upgrading my gear, I began to see legend level rarities on skills, which have a slightly different mechanic. Gear, which we'll talk about very shortly, has the ability to modify how often you'll see high rarity skills, and top level gear offers the ability to see legend level skills as well, which are effectively beefed up versions of master level skills. For example, this amulet currently equipped by my barbarian increases the chance that a legend level skill will replace its master version. Legend rarity changes the skill completely, similar to what you might see in Vampire Survivors when you unlock an evolved skill. For example, you might see First Strike, a legend level skill offered by the Goddess of Fate, which causes you to deal 400% damage against enemies with full health. Or Vampirism, offered by the Daughter of Death, which removes all of your armor, but also enables you to gain life when attacking enemies. As you probably realized, a lot of these legend level skills are only available once you've fully kitted out in high level gear. And as your gear gets better, you'll see these skills more and more often, which adds a nice layer of meta-wide progression to your character builds. Eventually, you'll have the ability to change these choices offered by the gods as well by using dice, and you can get dice in a few ways, mostly through gear. Dice come in 3 flavors. Reroll dice allow you to reroll your choices into new ones offered by the same god. Banished dice give you the ability to remove a choice from the pool until the run is over. And alteration dice allow you to change your offerings to a new god entirely. So you've got a few ways to snip and swap your builds outside of just simply restarting if you get a bad run. Don't lie, I know we all do it. As you complete runs in Death Must Die, you'll start to find gear randomly dropped by enemies and bosses. Each piece of gear has a random rarity assigned to it, similar to skills, and these range from common all the way up to mythic. When you press the B button, you'll be able to see your current character loadout, and their inventory, which shows the items you've collected and which ones you've got equipped. Simple stuff. Some gear can only be equipped by specific classes, and an equipped item becomes bound to that character permanently. So you'll need to make a choice when giving a specific character an item that you found, meaning that while you're out on your skeleton smashing soiree, you'll often find gear that you can't equip straight away. The advantage to this is that you can progress all of your characters in your roster by playing your favourite one, and finding gear to strengthen the others as you go. And this is a good incentive to enable the player to try out multiple characters without being shoehorned into one specific playstyle. The downside to this is that a lot of the time you'll end up finding gear that is entirely useless if you really want to take your favourite character to the top. If you kill a strong boss and you don't roll an item for the character that you want, it can feel a little bit underwhelming. Each piece of gear comes with its own set of stats and a rarity, and the fancier the gear, the juicier the stats are. A piece of mythic gear, for example, will often have better stats than a piece of common gear, and there's a lot of different stats depending on the type of gear and the class that can use it. For example, boots often have a movement speed bonus, and rings often have a bonus to skill rarity. So having a great mythic ring might give you a higher chance of seeing legend and master level skills in game. Gear's also got other stats as well, like evasion or an armor stat boost or even a lifesteal trait, which enables your characters to build in specific ways. Better pieces of gear often have skills assigned to them as well, which enable the use of specific passives, like this barbarian relic. Equipping this relic enables the Poison Nova ability, which grants the chance for a dash ability to generate poison clouds on use. This provides another interesting layer of mechanical depth to the already quite complex item system in Death Must Die. You not only have the ability to tweak your character by the skills found in game, but also the ability to tailor your build and meta gameplay by the items that they're wearing. And this is a similar mechanic to other looter style games, particularly taking inspiration from ARPGs like Diablo and Path of Exile, and I really like this. The developers managed to blend the mechanics from other games to evolve the survivor-like genre, and this is really good to see. And while we're on the topic of items, I want to highlight the really great level of in-game explanation that the developers have gone to the trouble of adding. When you open the inventory menu, you'll see a character sheet displayed on the left side of the screen. Pretty standard stuff. But in this case, if you hover over a specific stat, you'll be presented with a tooltip which explains exactly what each stat does. And I want to commend the developers for this, because you don't always get this level of detail in games these days, especially with small indie games. By having the ability to understand exactly what each of my items and stats do, I don't have to quit the game or pull up a second tab with the wiki to learn the game's mechanics. Plus, it's really great in the early stages of a game's life cycle, especially for indie games, because a lot of the time a wiki might not even exist, and it makes finding this information sometimes really hard or downright impossible, so good job developers. This also extends to the skill screen as well. If you press tab while you're in game, you'll be presented with a handy dandy skill menu, which shows which skills you've currently learned. Hovering over these skills shows exactly what the ability is, and what keywords it has, and this simple inclusion of information allows the player to understand skill and item synergies more easily, and gives the player enough knowledge to theorycraft without relying on the internet for help. So if you're looking for your first ever survivor-like game, this one might be right up your alley. I do want to highlight a minor inconsistency here though. While I want to commend the level of information and clarity that the game provides, there are some cases in which I thought this could be improved, mainly on the skills themselves. The consecration skill, for example. The tooltip says that whenever an enemy damages you, you'll heal back a percentage of the damage dealt, and you'll deal this damage back to the enemy, multiplied before reductions. Like, I'm sure if I sat down and tried to internalize that for a few seconds, I could probably figure it out, but I'm sure this explanation could be a lot clearer. And there's a few more examples of this problem scattered around some of the other skills as well. But again, this is a minor problem overall. Once you've unlocked it, you'll have the ability to buy and sell gear at the shopkeeper, located in the hub area in between runs. This entrepreneurial enigma sells random items, which change each time you wrap up a run, and to purchase these items you'll need to collect gold. Gold can be found by killing enemies and smashing pots found around the level, and you can earn more gold by selling your unwanted items back to the shopkeeper, which is pretty cool. In addition to this, the shopkeeper also allows you to save an item from being replaced next time the stock refreshes. Just drag the item you want to keep to the bottom of the tab and it'll be there until you remove it. This is a nice way to freeze a specific item until you can save up enough cash to buy it. While we're on the topic of the hub area, alongside the shopkeeper you'll also find a stash feature as well, which acts like a bank. Here you can store items, and you can access this stash from any of your characters, so it's a good way to facilitate sharing your items across your roster. The hub area also has a few more features as well, including a bookshelf which stores the various books you'll encounter across the game, which offers tidbits of lore if you're interested in that. When you first start playing, you'll start the game with access to one single character, the Knight. As you complete runs and unlock achievements, you'll begin to unlock more and more characters, ranging from the Barbarian who uses heavy two-handed swings to the Sorcerer who uses ranged fireball attacks. And you'll also unlock the Assassin, who I thought was pretty terrible overall, but makes for some really nice zombie killing ASMR. It's unfortunate that there's only one range class in the game in its current state, because I thought range was probably my favourite overall, and the other 4 melee classes are arguably quite similar in their playstyles. Despite this, there is a good amount of build variety between characters, and when you start combining the skills offered by various gods and equipping different items to enable your builds, these characters can do some pretty cool things. Each character in Death Must Die has its own specific set of achievements, requiring you to complete specific gameplay objectives, and completion of these objectives unlocks signs. You can see your current achievement progression by visiting the Scrivener in the hub area. Once you've completed a character's achievement, the corresponding sign will be unlocked when you select that character. For example, killing 500 skeletons with the Knight unlocks the sign of the hero, and killing the Necromancer boss with the Sorceress unlocks the sign of time space. These signs act as passive buffs for your character, providing a stat boost or some other perk, and I like to think of these as archetypes. The Barbarian has 5 different signs that can be unlocked, and you can equip one at a time, ranging from providing more health but less health regeneration, to granting you an attack bonus based on how much armor the character has. This is another interesting layer of progression outside of the skills you find within a run, and allows you to build your character outside of runs, just like the gear system. In its current state, this system doesn't really offer a huge amount given the lack of content that the game currently has, but it's another fully working and realised system that the developers have to play with, once the game gets more content as early access progresses. And I think this is a theme with Death Must Die. The backbone of the game is here. All of the systems work really well, and they hardly have any flaws or inconsistencies, but in its current early access state, there isn't a huge amount of depth to any one of these systems, and because of this the game is relatively small, offering a small number of bosses to kill and runs that only last about 20 minutes. So eventually you'll kit your favourite character out in some good gear and you'll kill the final boss, Dracula, with all of his limbs this time. It took me a while to get to this point, but when I finally did, I wondered, was that it? Well no, because Death Must Die has its own endgame system, which works fairly well. However, again, it lacks content at the time of writing this review. After you kill the final boss with any character, you'll unlock the Star Crux system, which can be activated from the hub area before you start your run. The Star Crux system works similarly to other endgame systems in other ARPG games, and allows you to increase your item rarity modifier at the cost of buffing enemy stats. At the moment, there are only 2 modifiers which can be enabled. The first increases enemies' movement speed, and the second increases their area, which I assume is the size of their attacks. As I said, at the moment there isn't that much to do with this system, but it is a good indication that the developers have endgame features in their mind, and I'm glad to see that an incentive does exist in the game to continue playing, if you want to spice up your runs after completing the current final boss. So we've dived into the game's overall mechanics, and we've talked about what makes it good, but what about the bad bits? Well, I'm happy to report that there aren't too many things that bother me about the game in its current state, outside of the obvious lack of content and questionable voice acting at times. But there were a few minor issues. Inventory management is a bit of a pain in the arse, especially in the middle of combat. Because this game is a survivor-like, there's never really any downtime during the fights, so when shit starts flying, it'll never stop until either you win or you die, and that becomes a problem when you try and sort out your gear or your inventory. When you kill enemies and bosses, they'll drop items on the floor, and we all love items, but when you press the inventory button the game pauses, which is good. But if your backpack is full, you'll need to drop the items to make room for new ones, and this dance of dropping and picking up loot becomes painful pretty quickly. Thankfully, the developers have added a mechanism to the code to pick up more valuable items over the lesser ones, but it's still a pain to have to retrain my focus to inventory management rather than killing enemies, and this ended up getting me killed a few times. I'm not sure why more than once I threw my own life away trying to cram one more common item into my backpack, But hey, we've all been there, right? Most of the problem with this inventory management issue stems from the fact that the backpack is so small. Why can't I just pick up all of the items and have infinite inventory space? It's not like this mechanic ever affected the gameplay in any way at all. Failing that, can't we just have an endgame screen which shows all the loot when the run has ended, and I can sort it all out from there? It just felt like an unnecessary chore at times, and distracted from a game that should simply just be about blowing up zombies. Another problem I had was with the character design. Aside from the lack of character variety, which we've already discussed, some of the humour in the game was a little bit strange. For example, the assassin has some very classic internet humour in her personality, which is fine. It's a little immersion breaking because she'll use half sentences and emojis which don't really fit the aesthetic of the game at all. But this didn't really bother me, but I can imagine it might bother some people, so keep that in mind. Lastly, another problem I had was with the way the melee combat works. Death Must Die has a lot of similarities to other games like Vampire Survivors, but it has its own key differences as well, namely in the way that enemies use attacks. When an enemy attacks, it'll be telegraphed around them with a red circle, or some sort of shape telling you where not to stand, and this goes from dark to bright red when they're about to attack, which is good. But in a game like this, the use of telegraphed attacks becomes really difficult to see when things are getting really hectic, and when there's hundreds of enemies on the screen, the game just sort of devolves into Dodge Red Circle Simulator. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't an inherent problem with Death Must Die itself, because I've seen a lot of other survivor-likes also fall for this same problem. But this became immediately apparent when using melee characters, because when an enemy uses a telegraphed attack, unless you have the fingers of a wizard, the only way to escape these attacks is by dodging with the dash button, and you'll only usually get 1 or 2 dodges. So for me, playing melee became more about dashing in and out of combat to hit enemies, and this wasn't always the most fun. If I'm playing a massive hulking barbarian with a 2-handed axe, I want to crush the skulls of skeletons with my fists. I want to delete zombies with huge swings, and I certainly don't want to be dancing in and around enemies, trying to squeeze hits in when I can. That type of playstyle fits more of an assassin or a sorcerer build, and when playing those characters, this type of playstyle of dodging and weaving while firing off spells felt really good, but when playing a hulking melee build, it made me feel really weak. Overall, Death Must Die is one to keep your eye on. The overall feel of the game, the graphics, the ambience, the sound and the gameplay all feel absolutely wonderful, and I enjoyed my 10 or so hours that I put into the game. All of the systems and the mechanics are there, and they all work really well, and the game has a solid foundation to work off. Aside from some of the issues I had with the voice acting, small gameplay issues, lack of content and other nitpicks, I really do think that Death Must Die has some serious potential to sit with the greats like Vampire Survivors or Holocure one day. For now, I would say that the game doesn't offer enough content for me to continue playing, but for the price of $7, it's got enough content to be worth the price. So if you're interested in this type of game, I would really recommend keeping your eye out for what comes next. So I hope you enjoyed this first look at Death Must Die, and if you did, please hit that like button or leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the game. And please subscribe if you want to support the channel and see more content like this in the future. And as always, happy skeleton smashing.